Okay, so getting into the Asgard Shi'ar war with regards to the mighty Thor, this is a pretty solid story. Something else to keep in mind, this also seems to take place before the events of Secret Empire, before anything happened in the main Secret Empire story. So this takes place before Secret Empire number 0 and the Free Comic Book Day issue and number 1, all the way up to the present day. It takes place before all that stuff. But the whole set of events that goes on here is actually pretty wild because this gives us a lot more insight into the Shi'ar Empire than we previously had before. Now, a little bit of explanation here for those of you guys who are just now getting into Thor and really just now getting into Marvel Comics. The Shi'ar Empire is a race that dates back quite some time, and it really all, goes all the way back to when Chris Claremont was writing the X-Men, and he was looking to introduce the Phoenix Force. And the idea was that the Shi'ar Empire isn't like an empire like humanity, right? Like the human race could be considered an empire. It's a very fledgling empire, but it could be considered an empire. The difference is that unlike the Badoon or unlike the Skrulls or the Kree or something like that, the Shi'ar is an amalgamation of races. It's a multitude of different races that have all come together under a single banner of the Shi'ar. Now, more often than not, the reason this is done is because of the fact that there's protection as part of the Shi'ar Empire, and that protection comes in the form of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. When it comes to their ranks, when it comes to like their governing body, there's the Magistrix or the Emperor, whatever you want to call it, the Emperor or Empress, the ones that are basically running the show. At this point in time in Marvel Comics, it's actually Gladiator, and we'll get into him here in a second because he's a pretty powerful character. The other half of this is that you have the Imperial Guard, which is basically the toughest members of the Shi'ar race or the Shi'ar Empire that all gather together as their singular leader. Now, you've got like an inner group of the Imperial Guard, which is like the very top people, but the Imperial Guard's pretty large in size in terms of how it functions and what it does, because it's basically like their core military. It's basically like the best of their military might. I mean, they have like an armada, they've got ships, all kinds of cool stuff, but the Imperial Guard is what you call in when things really hit the fan. And so whenever you read a story from Marvel Comics where it's like, oh, they're sending in the Imperial Guard, that means things are really gonna pop off. Now, in the case of Gladiator, because he's actually running the show here, it's really curious as to why it is he shows up on the steps of Asgardia. Now, the reason why this is kind of cool is because it actually gives us a couple characters fighting that we never really see engage in conflict. The first one is Heimdall, and the second one, of course, is Gladiator himself. Now, Heimdall functions very much in Marvel Comics the same way he does in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The difference here is basically how they look. But in terms of his form and function, he just sees virtually everything. But the funny thing about this is that there's this question that's kind of asked by Jason Aaron of, if he's an Asgardian, that means that he has to breathe, that means that he has to eat, it means that he has vulnerabilities just like virtually anybody else, albeit enhanced durability and enhanced skills. And so where he's the one that sees pretty much everything happening, if he functions like a normal being, then what happens if he blinks? And that's the coolest thing, is because in that instant, in that fraction of a second when he blinks, if someone's fast enough, they can dart from one side of the universe to the other. And that's exactly what happens here. In that fraction of a moment, when Heimdall blinks, Gladiator arrives. Now, the cool thing about Gladiator is that he's very much like Marvel's version of Superman, and Marvel has a lot of those. I mean, in truth, when it comes to like those legacy characters, there's no possible way Marvel could make a character that has a cape and that can fly and that has that's super strong without having the same powers as Superman. They're basically just the foundation of virtually all abilities. I mean, Superman's powers aren't really unique anymore. The only ones that stand out are like his super breath, his heat vision, and even then, those aspects of his character are kind of spread out. Now, I mean, it's Superman. I mean, no one's gonna say Superman falls rank and file with every other superhero ever. It's Superman. It's the superhero. So the cool thing here is that Gladiator, when it comes to his abilities, he's extremely powerful. I mean, he's extremely strong, he's extremely durable, he has, laser vision and all kinds of cool stuff, but his powers are intertwined directly with his confidence. So if he engages in a conflict and he starts losing and his confidence starts to wane, his powers will go with it. And so it was really kind of a cool scenario, but outside of that one caveat, he is a force to be reckoned with. When it comes down to it, if Gladiator jumps into the conflict, then that means whoever it is that he's facing against, barring it being like Thanos or like Galactus or somebody like that, they're probably going to be done. But the whole idea of him arriving here is for the purpose of actually taking Jane Foster herself. Now, of course, what ends up happening is that where Heimdall is the eyes and ears, he's also the first line of protection with Asgard. And so with Gladiator overpowering Heimdall, this says something. Because remember, if Heimdall's supposed to be the first line of protection, him, then that means that he's the one that comes before Odin and he comes before Thor. He's really one of the most powerful beings in Asgard. But in the middle of all this, because of the fact that the Imperial Guard is just kind of tearing everything apart trying to find Thor, ultimately Jane Foster reveals herself. And in that moment, she's essentially taken by Gladiator and brought before those individuals who sent Gladiator to Asgard in the first place, which are revealed to be none other than Shi'ar and Kithri. Now, here's the cool thing about this. This is why I say we get a lot more expansion on the Shi'ar race than we ever really did before. Shi'ar and Kithri is very akin to Thor and Odin, just because of the fact that in that part of the world, there are people that worship Thor and Odin. They follow that belief system that there's Odin and there's the son Thor and there's Loki, the god of mischief, and so on and so forth. With this, the Shi'ar look at Shi'ar and Kithri much the same way. The difference here is that much like Thor and Odin, Shi'ar and Kithri are very much real, and they're basically the gods of the Shi'ar race. And that's the cool thing here, because remember, one of the things that was established in Jason Aaron's Thor God of Thunder storyline was the idea of gods, the idea that there is this great big huge pantheon. Every planet has its own gods. Every universe has gods. In truth, the question that really comes out of that is which came first, the chicken or the egg? Is it the gods who arrived on the planet and they were viewed as gods by people who worship them? Or were the gods given life by virtue of the worship that people gave them? And so that's the whole basis behind this particular scenario. But in this instance, it's really more of the idea that Shi'ar and Kithri are basically engaging in this challenge of the gods to basically show which god is the greater. Is it Thor or is it Shi'ar and Kithri? Now, the reason behind this, we don't really know, and actually we won't find out here for a little bit. But transitioning back to Asgard, what we do here is we actually pick up with Sif and we pick up with Cole. Now, Cole Borson is a guy that we will actually talk about once we get around to November with regards to our whole run on Thor, Fear Itself, all that kind of good stuff. But the introduction of Cole was part and parcel to Fear Itself. And what it basically revealed is that Odin had a third brother that nobody knew about. That for years and years and years, it was believed that the Odin force was basically just the amalgamation of the life energies of Odin's brothers and himself combined into a singular being that allowed him to do a wide array of different things. The introduction of Cole also came with him basically having his own hammers, and these hammers were given to different people across the Marvel Universe, each one pertaining to a particular group of superheroes. So like Juggernaut, for example, had a hammer and he ended up going against the X-Men. And so that's the kind of cool scenario that we saw, because dude, when Juggernaut has the hammer, it is amazing. It's one of the coolest things ever. Fear Itself was an amazing storyline when it came to Thor, one of my absolute favorites. But the overarching gist here is that because Cole Borson was effectively defeated by a large part of the superhero community, this led to Cole more or less just kind of being resigned to living in Asgard proper. Now, the difference here is that going into the events of Siege and going into these stories where it basically saw Asgard destroyed and then eventually reformed by Odin himself, with the injury of the mother of Thor basically having happened at the beginning of the story, which again, we covered all that stuff, it ultimately led to Odin basically vacating his position as king of Asgard, more or less, and then Cole Borson taking up his place as regent. And what this means is that Cole Borson has all the authority of Odin, meaning when he speaks on behalf of Odin. Now, the reason why this is important is because of the fact that Odin did not remove himself as king and make Cole king in his place, because now that would mean that Cole has the power of a king. He can reject Odin's claim to the throne if Odin ever decided to come back. That's not the case. Instead, what it means is that Odin can return at any time and Cole has to give up his seat. Now, if he refused, I mean, it wouldn't matter. Odin would just crush him and then he would just take his seat back. But the fact remains, when it comes to like proper policy, when it comes to politics, that's basically what it is that's going on here. The other half of this is that Cole Borson hates Thor. Cole is a reflection of a lot of the fans out there who do not like Jane Foster. And that's one of the cool things about Jason Aaron's run on Thor, is because he recognizes there are people out there who just don't like Jane Foster. To them, Odin's son is the only Thor. And they're not wrong. It's their personal opinion, and there's nothing wrong with them for having that opinion. But Jason Aaron recognizes that. Now, Jane Foster's Thor, and we get those stories, and we will get those stories until Odin's son gets his hammer back. We know that's going to happen, but the cool thing is we get these really interesting stories in the interim. But the funny thing about Sif in this particular situation is that she actually goads Cole Borson. What she does is she says, look, we know you don't like this new Thor. We know you don't like her. You don't think she's worthy of the hammer. You believe that only the Odin family line should be the ones to be able to wield it. And so the question I have is this: if Asgard has been left in ruins by the Shi'ar, who are you going to allow to carry the glory of defeating the Shi'ar Empire in return for their actions? Are you going to let Thor get that glory, or are you going to be the one to do it? And so at that point, it's just a matter of honor. At that point, it's just a matter of, I will not let Thor take the glory of this battlefield today. I will be the one to win, to keep the honor of the Odin family. And so that's the cool thing here, is it's basically just kind of preying on the honor that he has, basically saying, look, I know that for you, it's family first. So are you going to stick up for your family, or are you going to let somebody walk in and capture this glory here? Now, the other half of this is the actual challenge of the gods. And it's actually kind of interesting the way this works, because what Jason Aaron seems to be toying on here is the idea that Shara and Kithri, they're not the embodiment of prayers of the Shi'ar. It's really just a matter of who is it that the various members of the Shi'ar race will pray to in their time of dire need. And so the goal is to basically gain points through prayers. And it's and it's kind of a funny scenario, because the way they do this is instituting like mass casualties, doing things like creating tidal waves and these natural disasters and all these huge conflicts. And it's interesting because what they're really doing here is they're saying it's not a matter of whether or not Jane Foster saves the day. It's a matter of when they're fleeing for their lives, who are they praying to save them, or who are they praying to save them? Are they praying to us, Shara and Kithri, or are they praying to Thor? And so again, it's kind of a cool scenario, because it's one of these situations where the more Thor acts, the more people become aware of who she is. And so it's really kind of a cool scenario, because she goes through and she begins earning the adoration of all these members of the Shi'ar race who stop, praying to Shara and Kithri and start praying to Thor. Now, the human element of Jane Foster really comes into play when she basically says, no, don't pray to me. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm just helping you guys. And really, for the people who don't like Jane Foster, that will fan them on even further in their hatred for Jane Foster. But, it's still kind of an interesting scenario, because if it was Odin's son, it really kind of depends on the writer. I mean, some writers, most likely Jason Aaron, would have been like, oh, it's not necessary, but if you have alcohol, I'll take some of that, But with regards to Jane Foster, it's not that way. She's very human. She's very simple in terms of how she views the world. We could literally have that discussion. I mean, we could really say, who was working to make the universe a better place? Was it Odin's son, or was it Jane Foster? Because in truth, they both pretty much did the same thing. Odin's son fought some amazing and epic battles. He relished in the conflict. He enjoyed the thrill of the hunt, so to speak. But at the end of the day, he was fighting bad guys that wanted to destroy the earth. Jane Foster doesn't really relish in the glory of battle. She doesn't really live to win the day, but she fights against bad guys and she saves the world. So it really kind of creates this interesting scenario. But in every single instance, every single one of these tests, whether it be some comet, that's just like spiraling across the universe, whether it's, some crazy person who's going to sacrifice their child in the name of Shara and Kithri, each time Jane Foster steps in, she's basically able to save these people, or at least save them as best she can. And each time she ends up gaining more prayers, gaining more adoration. Now, in truth, at the end of the day, none of it really matters, because of course we end up having this massive battle in space between Cole Borson and the Shi'ar Empire. That's not wildly important, but it is kind of interesting to see. I mean, it's something to keep us entertained and keep us a little more interested. But we actually jump back a little bit, jump back about a few days before any of this took place, and we actually end up finding out this entire scenario was basically goaded by Loki himself. Now, something to keep in mind when it comes to Jason Aaron's run on the Mighty Thor, he's basically been telling us there's a much bigger picture, a much bigger game that Loki's playing. We don't know what it is, but we know that there's a plan in place. Loki's doing all these things because it's all part of a plan. He's not just running around instigating chaos, seeding conflict and reaping war. It's not that way. Instead, he's going through a plan. It's something that he's basically set up. We just don't really know what it is. And so these little things that come in here and there, every time we see them, we have to ask the question, is Loki doing this because he's just being a dick? Or is Loki doing it because it's all part of the plan? And so again, it's kind of an interesting scenario, but jumping back into Jane Foster, really, she just ends up having enough of this massive conflict, ends up having enough of this battle. And so what ends up happening is she actually turns on Shara and Kithri, attempts to basically end the conflict. But what we end up learning here is that when it comes to like the scoreboard, Jane Foster lost by like an insane margin. I mean, she was just readily stomped by a country mile when it came to like garnering prayers, because Shara and Kithri are just too entrenched into the Shi'ar race. The Shi'ar race has been worshiping them for too long. It's the only gods that they know of, the only gods that they care about. They're too intertwined when it comes to the Shi'ar race itself. But Jane Foster actually ends up winning. And the reason why is because she's awarded bonus points because of the fact that she inspired other gods to fight on her behalf. Most notably, even if it's only through wrath, even if it's only through anger and absolute hatred, Cole Borson basically fought the Shi'ar Empire on behalf of Jane Foster. He fought the other side of the battle. And that's why I say that's kind of significant, but not the most important thing ever. It's the way in which she ends up basically, coming out on top of the conflict. But the cool thing about this is that in the face of almost guaranteed defeat at the hands of Jane Foster herself. What ends up happening is Shi'ar and Kithri actually invoke the Phoenix Force. Now, the Phoenix Force is an interesting concept in the realm of Marvel Comics because, one, this is the first time, or at least that we're aware of, because I don't know where this fits chronologically in relation to like Thanos or the Jean Grey solo series, but we can just kind of assume this is one of the first times that we see the Phoenix Force in all new, all different Marvel. And it's cool to see because of the fact that the Phoenix has existed all around Marvel Comics for quite some time. Now, something that I want to point out here and something that I want to talk about here for a second was the question that we brought up during our Thanos video. One of the things that I had pointed out is that historically speaking, there's only ever been one host for the Phoenix Force at any one particular time, which is to say there's only ever been one instance where the Phoenix shows up and then gives somebody his powers. There have been people like Rachel Summers who were time displaced and they had the powers of the Phoenix, but the Phoenix, whenever it shows up, says, you as an individual are now my avatar. The only real exception to that came with Avengers versus X-Men, and that was only because of the fact that they tried to destroy the Phoenix Force and ended up dispersing among 5 people. But the Phoenix did not choose to go into those 5 people. It was just kind of destroyed, or at least attacked by Tony Stark, which led to it splitting up into 5 different people. What we ended up having with the Thanos story, at least one of the things that I brought up, is that by the time we finished that story, the all-new younger version of Jean Grey, Thane himself, and then of course Quentin Quire, as we'll see in the story, all become hosts for the Phoenix. And it doesn't usually work that way. The Phoenix Force is a multiversal entity, or kind of like an omniversal entity. And what that means is that much like, the One Above All or the Living Tribunal, there's only one Phoenix Force throughout the multiverse. The difference is that the Phoenix Force will manifest itself in different universes. Sometimes all the universes at the same time, other times only one universe at a time. But the Phoenix will only ever usually choose one host for itself in any one particular universe. What we're seeing here with regards to the younger version of Jean Grey, with Thane, the son of Thanos, with Quentin Quire here, this is new. This is something that we haven't really seen before, or if we have, I've never seen it before. Having multiple hosts for the Phoenix Force who've all gained the power of the Phoenix around the same time in a single continuity of a story. Now again, we don't really know where like Thanos resides. We don't really know the end result of this Jean Grey story, and we don't really know where like this resides in continuity. They could just happen one after the other. It could simply just be that within the realm of all new, all different Marvel's continuity, Quentin Quire becomes the host for the Phoenix, then it leaves him, and then it goes to Thane, then it leaves Thane, and then it appears to Jean Grey. That's entirely possible. We simply just don't know yet. At this point, we're waiting for the stories to flesh out. We're waiting to see where they end up, and then we'll be able to kind of bring them together. And once we see like middle roads, like for example, if we have a big crossover event, if it's like the Omega issue of Secret Empire, the 11th issue, because it's 11 issues now, if it's like the 11th issue of Secret Empire, and like Quentin Quire and Thane and Jean Grey are all there, and they all have the power of the Phoenix Force, then that would give us an answer to the question that we're looking for. But for right now, we don't really have a definitive answer. But essentially, because of the fact that Shi'ar and Kithri are facing almost imminent destruction, they basically bring the Phoenix Force back out. They effectively resurrect it. Now, this is kind of a cool scenario because for those individuals who love Odin's son and those individuals who are not really partial to Jane Foster, this is interesting because Jane Foster's never fought the Phoenix Force before. And the Phoenix is not an entity that you can fight through physical contact. It doesn't work that way. It's non-corporeal. For all the good it'll do to hit the Phoenix Force with a hammer, she might as well be swinging its smoke. And so it's really kind of a cool scenario because we're talking about a level of power that's so extreme, even if Jane Foster was able to hit it with the hammer, it wouldn't do any good. And so what ends up happening is we end up having Jane Foster Thor actually travel back to Earth and grab Quentin Quire and bring him with her to the battlefield, ultimately to deal with the Phoenix Force proper. Now, the reason why this matters is for a couple things. The first is that it's well known that writer Jason Aaron loves Quentin Quire, and I'm really excited to see what his solo series is about. But two, it's not the first time that Quentin Quire and the Phoenix Force have gone hand in hand. And the story that we did from New X-Men, which was called Here Comes Tomorrow, I think it was, it dealt with the idea of like Jean Grey, the full encompassing power of what she does as the Phoenix, but we saw all these different alternate reality hosts of the Phoenix Force, which is why I say the Phoenix manifests in a multitude of different realities. But we saw all these different alternate reality hosts of the Phoenix Force, one of whom was Quentin Quire. And so the idea is that Quentin, whether it's in an alternate universe or whether it's in the main Marvel universe, will at some point become a host for the Phoenix Force, just because of the fact that Quentin Quire is an Omega level telepath. The term Omega level when it comes to mutants is just kind of like this general phrase, this somewhat vague, a little enigmatic phrase, but it basically means that that's the highest level of power that any one particular mutant can have. It's really kind of a cool scenario because Jane Foster is actually yanked into the white hot room of the Phoenix by the Phoenix entity itself. itself. Now again, the White Hot Room is kind of like this way station. It's kind of this place that's basically the core center of the multiverse, is the best way that I can describe it. This is one of the weird things about Marvel Comics. Different locations are depicted different ways. Some people say the White Hot Room is the way station you travel to before you go to the afterlife. Some people say the White Hot Room is basically where the current host of the Phoenix Force resides while it's doing whatever the Phoenix Force, is doing. Different people, different writers depict it different ways. But on the whole, the White Hot Room is usually where a person's conscious mind goes when the Phoenix wants to talk to it, just because of the fact that the Phoenix cannot commune with a person through traditional means, meaning the Phoenix can't talk like a normal human being. It has to take a host in order to be able to pull that off. And so the idea is that it basically talks to Jane Foster and it actually makes fun of her a little bit. It says, look, you fancy yourself a god with your little hammer and you're riding around with your little armor. You know nothing of the term. You know nothing of the phrase God. I am the very manifestation of all life that will ever exist and that has ever existed. I serve the singular purpose of destroying all things. If I wanted to, I could snuff you out of existence right now. And that's 100% true. If the Phoenix Force wanted to get rid of Jane Foster Thor, she would be gone. And that's all there is to it. And so ultimately, what she ends up realizing, and it's kind of a caveat that Jason Aaron uses here, but what Jane Foster does is actually manifest her hammer inside the White Hot Room. Now, in truth, I don't really know how it is this happens. The hammer is a physical object. Right now, they're inside the mind of, or really inside the Phoenix Force itself, really kind of inside the Phoenix Force's own mind, so to speak. There's no real definitive answer given here. It's kind of cloak and dagger. Maybe it's one of those things that'll be explained later on, or maybe it'll be, left ambiguous forever. But attacking the Phoenix Force from the inside is tantamount to the scene from Old Man Logan when Old Man Hulk swallowed Wolverine and Wolverine killed him from the inside out. That's basically what it was that happened here. In addition to this, when Quentin Quire finally absorbs the Phoenix entity unto itself and becomes its new host, Odin's son arrives just in time to miss the battle. Just in time to catch the tail end of it all. So again, it's kind of an interesting situation just because of the fact that Jane Foster has more or less proved that she is a legitimate god among all the other gods that exist out there, or really the concept of Thor is a legitimate god when it stands the test of time of what it is that they're capable of. What we also end up having is, of course, this revelation that this is the reason why it is Odin's son and Jane Foster both end up traveling back to Earth, which leads them into the Secret Empire conflict. And so what seems to be taking place here is that Jason Aaron is basically moving away from the direction of focusing on Jane Foster Thor and Odin's son in his Thor run and focusing on whoever it is the all-new Ultimate Thor is. And so again, it's kind of a cool scenario. I'm not going to swear to that, but that seems to be what it is that's happening with regards to the Thor stories. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.